When I think of the word legacy, I think of what remains when something's gone. So the legacy of Indian heritage would be the stories of all the students that ever went there. It's huge. I know there are people who never really quite understood what Indian heritage was all about. And how is Bob tied to that? He's part of that story in a really profound way. All of us are. It's my understanding that Indian Heritage was initially set up as a dropout prevention program, and obviously it developed into so much more. And I think students deserve more than dropout prevention. Education is about critical thinking and opening up opportunity and seeing the world through a lens that maybe you weren't exposed to or would never have considered before. And so under Bob's leadership, that's what happened. It was no longer just a last stop on a place to nowhere. It became a stepping stone up instead of last stop or else.
If there are very few students left in the school, you're on the way to no future. For fiscal reasons, if nothing else, the district will close it down. There hadn't been enough attention paid to providing sufficient fiscal and human resources to the school or to the quality of the leaders put in charge of the school to make it thrive. And so it was dying.
It was a hard school. A lot of, drug and alcohol, a lot of angry students. I was the counselor there then, and we had gone through like principals like every 3 months.
When Bob took it over, there wasn't much left.
They needed somebody, and Bob wanted it. He wanted to be there.
And Robert came in without many students there, managed to obtain the trust of many parts of our Native American community, and the population began to grow.
All these skilled, wonderful teachers that knew how to work with our kids. They had cultural competency. They provided instructional delivery that was, culturally relevant and responsive.
Even though it was a specialized population and we developed our specialized curriculum, it still had all of the earmarks of a regular program.
For all of us staff members, he encouraged us to really talk about sobriety. We had sobriety assemblies, and so that was a big part of our curriculum. But he didn't always stand up front. He wanted to push everyone up front. He wanted us all to be leaders. He encouraged all his staff to rise to that vision that he had. And it was very healing because of a lot of the historical trauma that we as Native people have faced with education. And we didn't want to be part of the problem and oppress our kids.
I came from Montana, and then when I came here, I heard about the Indian school, Indian Heritage, and I was like, I never heard about no other Indian school before, and it was really new to me. So, I went there and checked it out and got enrolled.
I moved from Tacoma to Seattle, and actually my mom was just like, yeah, it's an Indian school. Your brothers went there. You're going to go there.
I was in a position where Seattle School District was essentially telling me what my available options were. And Indian Heritage, surprisingly enough, was at the top of the list because their administration had asked for me specifically.
At the time I lived in Greenwood. It was within walking distance, so I picked that school. And so that's when I was informed, well, you have to have an interview first.
Yeah, they talked about, our tribal affiliation, and then what it meant to be Indian, and then also where I want my education to go.
We all had questions that we put on an interview for students to come in and to make sure that they knew what Indian Heritage was about, being alcohol, drug-free, that we had high expectations and that they would show up. And I think it really put students on notice that we really cared about them and we wanted them to be responsible, that we would do our part at Indian Heritage as a staff, and we wanted the students to do their part as well.
And then they accepted me. So, because my next choice would have been, if I wouldn't have got accepted, then I would have went to African American Academy because it was closer and easier to get to than UNEA at the time. But ultimately, I think it was a better choice.
Back in the day, Indian people, we determined who our family was. We determined who our people were. And that's all the school was.
You would think that you might be treated different, but I never noticed it.
If you were at the school, you were Indian, you were Indian heritage, and nobody cared. You could be, Norwegian ethnicity, but you were family. And I loved that about the school, that as a community, when somebody went through the interview process and was in, they were part of our family. But part of it had to do with the desire to learn about who we are as people and a commitment to education.
I mean, he did a lot of things that didn't have necessarily educational ramifications. Well, they did, because he made sure people weren't hungry.
For kids who didn't get breakfast, he made sure they got something to eat here every day, every morning. That's one thing cool about Mr. Eaglestaff, too. He was very concerned about his students. Don't ever get it twisted. Mr. Eaglestaff.
He would address us all in the morning at breakfast, the way that a father would address his family. This is what's going to happen today. This is what is expected of you. Go into the world and do good in school.
He seemed like all about the students, that's the reason why he was there. I don't think he was getting rich as a principal. He held everything together. When you go to schools, you have like your school pride. You'll have a little bit of pride for your school and all that, where he somehow kind of transformed that, and it was a family.
Our funding was very limited. I know that there was field trips where the teachers paid for them out of their own pockets because, we meant that much to them.
That's the thing about that school. There really wasn't your cliques. There really wasn't, your separate sides. Like being in 9th grade, hanging out with seniors.
We were a family. How many schools can you say that you were a family?
Sometimes Indian heritage is more of a home and more stable than where many of my kids come from.
A lot of kids that went to that school at that time all came from broken homes. All had problems. The parents were on drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. The home life was not good. And so, they're kind of released. They got to come to school. It's kind of a little bit different. So kids that in any other school probably wouldn't even have showed up.
You could come and make sense out of things. No matter what you were going through at home, and everybody had some, turmoil they were going through. For the duration that you were at Indian Heritage, things made sense.
Coming to Indian Heritage, teachers did more than just teach. They counseled. They were the counselors. They were the elders. They were the people that helped. Indian people are born with this ancient pain, and it's like a form of post-traumatic stress disorder even, and it's been documented. And that's the kind of environment that somebody who's got that kind of background needs to be in, a nurturing environment that strengthens your culture.
Not only did he want to empower youth, but everyone around him. For example, we had students who really, really struggled with attendance, and instead of being punitive, he would have them check in with him every morning. And I don't know a lot of administrators who would handle it like that. Instead of going to your class and getting in trouble for being late, just stop by and let me know you're here.
Bob and I were very acquainted in both the positive and the negative. I was a pretty troubled kid, so I was a handful, so there was a lot of, getting sent to the office, or just Raj is in a bad mood, he needs to go talk to Bob, sort of thing.
Bob drew on his own past of, difficulties and overcoming difficulties and overcoming things that were tough for him. And he related to kids wonderfully well.
He could kind of see where I was at, with all the chaos that was going on inside me. he could kind of like bypass all of it and just kind of touch the kid that was really, going through all this at the time, then, I'd be okay.
He brought a student to me, and this was a student who was having difficulty with some of her medical needs, and she also was having difficulty talking with her parents about that. And so he asked me to talk with her parents, and we brought him in, and she was a very small young girl, and she could talk to me very well, but when her parents came into the room, her parents did all of the talking. So I stepped out and I said, Bob, I'm just not seeming to be able to help the parents listen to their daughter. And he ran to his office and he brought back a feather and he said, okay, every time you talk, you hold on to this. And then when it's her turn to talk, you pass it to her, and her parents will know what to do with that. And so I did, and it was like magic, just magic. The parents stopped, they listened, and we were able to help their daughter. And I know that's what they wanted to do, but I wasn't able to navigate through some of those issues, and he just cut right to the core for that. It was wonderful.
He saved kids from being kicked out.
So that was really cool about Mr. Eaglestaff. Like if you were a bad kid, he wouldn't single you out. He'd give you the same opportunity he would give to anybody.
He'd let you know that you messed up, and you're doing something that you're not supposed to, but wasn't, grilling you. It kind of put it in your court, like, you're responsible for this. You're going to need to take responsibility for what you did, but it's not, it wasn't like harsh where you, like some, like when you get disciplined and, elsewhere or, like detention and stuff like that. So ultimately you felt, and more in the wrong. You already knew you were in the wrong, but you actually realized it after you got done talking to you. Like, ah, man, that kind of sucked. It kind of makes you feel a little crunchy.
My friend Rimone got caught tagging in here by the principal, Mr. Eaglestaff, and I came in here, and my boy Rimone was all up over here with the roller, all mad, painting over his graffiti. But yeah, Mr. Eaglestaff made him repaint the whole bathroom for when he got caught tagging in here.
Looking back on it now, I really realize that at times, the teachers would become a little bit testy with him because he always seemed to take the kid's position, but it was up to a certain point.
I remember being a kid, and I think even as a young person, when you see adults getting your back like that and working in tandem, I think it's a really positive thing, and you can't help but feel loved and supported. And when people feel like that, then you can start to excel. And I think he was instrumental in making that happen.
My math teacher, Mr. Slater, kind of mentioned to us in passing if we wanted to be on the Scholastic team. I had him explain it to me, like, well, what's the Scholastic team? I don't know, what's that? It's like, oh, well, it's kind of like playing Jeopardy, but you're part of a team.
I coached it. I'll be just honest with you, I handpicked kids and I said, we're going to do this. We're going to represent. There's no shame in losing. There would be shame in not trying.
I felt comfortable with the idea, and so we said, why not? The semifinals, which none of us expected to be in. They had contested one of our players, and they had contested one of our answers. But we ended up winning anyway. It was really shocking because it didn't really sink in. I remember when I finally got home that night, I laid awake in my bed, and all I could think about was, oh my God, what if we win tomorrow? What if we win? What if we win tomorrow? What if we win? And when we won, it was a shining moment. That was one of the best experiences I've ever been through. The whole night, it was just surreal. And there's Robert Eaglestaff's signature, Jack Slater, who was our team manager, as it were.
But that was quite an event when we won the Buffalo Road. But I was in tears, I know. I think other people were too. It was a proud moment.
I'd never held anything as significant as a Buffalo Road before. It just felt so significant. It was a relief and a comfort and a joy, all kind of rolled into one. And I will always treasure it. What's interesting in hindsight is that no one had shown up to support us, which I resented at the time. But all the focus had currently been on the basketball team.
Ooh, the Eagles.
I remember being in 8th grade, I couldn't wait till the 9th grade to play. We were using old jerseys and all old stuff, and every kid that went there was broke, so it's not like we could go buy our own stuff, you know. And we had to kind of scrape some money together just to get shoes to play, you know.
This was a special team. We had the top rebounder in the city at the time. It was a legitimate squad.
There was a good couple years in a row when they were smashing every team they played. And one of those seasons, I got to ride along on the bench and sit down on the bench, and when after everybody else was done scoring and we won the game, they'd send me in.
So Seattle Public Schools, they require a certain grade point to participate in sports. And looking back, I don't recall any of my kids ever having to sit out because of not being eligible.
I remember we had a scrimmage game between our team and his son's team.
Yeah, we used to play them at least about 2 times every year. I actually played with them in some tournaments also, but it was just a lot of fun.
One of the things he wanted me to do also was to be one of the administrators who would play basketball against the kids. And so we would have a teacher-student basketball player. And I said, Bob, I've never played basketball before. You really don't want me to do that. And he said, well, no, the point is that we want the kids to win anyway, so you don't have to be very good.
You know how faculties are, they always want to try to beat the kids. I always root for the kids.
Once I got drafted because they didn't have enough on the teacher's side, and I ended up having to play a quarter. It didn't take them long to find out I wasn't a basketball player.
So he gave me 2 lessons, and at the end of the other one, he threw his arm around my shoulder and he said, Peg, let's stick to nursing. I'll bring you the first aid kit and you can cheer on the sideline, but you're right. We should not put you out in front of everybody.
You put these old men, according to our students, out on the court with all these young bucks, and it was really fun. It was a great community building time.
He loved basketball and he passed that along to me, and he would play with our teams, every team that he coached. It would always be a competition of who could beat my dad, but he definitely wasn't the player that he was when he was young.
I know he was recruited by the Bulls to play and then was hurt, so didn't get to pursue that dream.
We got married on August 6th of 1977, and then we drove out to South Dakota, and we both went to college to get our master's degree at the University of South Dakota in Vermilion. When he came here, I think that's when we both kind of got together about the spiritual part of our life. And that's when we started dancing. And we started our family and had Robin January 1st, 1979. He sundanced for 4 years at Greengrass after that. When we got our master's degree, we moved out here and he worked for United Indians for a little while. And we had Lewis, we had our second child. And he loved the diversity of Seattle, and people embraced him. First he was a teacher, and then to become a vice principal, you had to be a teacher for at least 3 years. But he always wanted to be a principal. Educational leadership was what he wanted. That's who he was.
It became more than him, he became a different man, and he went up to a different level in which I'm not sure if he knew he had that in him.
Bob was able to negotiate getting us into the Wilson Pacific building, which was no easy chore. Anytime that he could bring his presence to allow the school to be seen in a good light, he did.
Periodically, every year, right before school begins, all of the administrators, the principals, vice principals, they get together in a big meeting, the superintendent says all these things, and the plans for the year are perhaps laid out. And one of those such meetings, Bob presented one of his traditional Native American dances for us in the proper Native American dress for those occasions. It was very, very interesting. Everybody enjoyed it immensely. But that's the kind of thing he would do when and if he could to try to bring people some knowledge of the Native American culture, which most of our administrators, teachers just don't have.
I would say that we saw him sort of as our moral core, that he was able to talk about really tough issues and talk about the needs of students and how sometimes, even though we were trying to do the best that we could, we really didn't have a clear understanding of what the issues were. And so I can remember when he talked about mascots and the use of Native American symbols or names as mascots, and felt that that was really inappropriate. And that was really the first time we had that conversation in the district. Disney came out with Pocahontas, and he, as a leader, sent a letter to all of the staff in the district and said, this is a terrible thing what Disney is doing, and we really need to educate all of our kids. You may be taking them out to see this movie, but unless you put it into context and you talk about the Native American perspective, and quite frankly, how accurate or inaccurate this story is, it may keep the legacy of misinformation going. Everybody was absolutely silent, and we just listened to him. And again, when I talk about him being part of our moral core, he really was.
He balanced his life so well that you would never know that he would have that much time for one thing. He was such a great dad. He set so much time aside. It seemed like he was there every second for me, but at the same time, he was always there for his school. He took care of every one of his students and kids as much as, you know, anything else in his life. His profession was a lot more to him than just a job. It was his life.
My kids had a really hard time with the divorce. My son always says that, I'm so happy that you and Dad could be friends and that you didn't fight, you know, that there wasn't bitterness.
He still found the same amount of time to put aside for me and my sister, still be there for us, and never make it feel like anything had changed in our life. So, yeah.
I was at a powwow here in Seattle at Seattle Center. I went to leave the phone booth and there was this man, like, boom, right there. We talked for a little while and then he introduced me to his daughter and then he asked me out. And little did I know that would be a pivotal moment that would shape pretty much the rest of my life. He always wanted students to be proud of where they came from, whether they were Native or not. He thought one of the ways to do that was through dance and music, because dance and music is obviously a really powerful and expressive and creative medium.
We had a song and dance group, and we would go out and do dance performances for all the schools, and we would raise money for our powwows. Our children were involved in it. We had the kids involved in it. The kids were making their own outfits. And the purpose, I think, primarily was for our students. But then second to that was to let people know that we're still here and that we don't fit into many of people's stereotypes of what Native people look like or sound like. So they were educational. When you see youth speak and move, whether that's dance or any other medium, from an empowered, educated place, to me that's what real education is about. And I think it got people fired up. And if you want to get people on your team, you get them fired up and excited about what they're part of. And I think the dance team did that. Many things did that. The dance team was just one of them.
The school was given an award for the reading program. To be honest with you, and this is shameful, I don't remember if he were singled out for an award or not. Should have been.
There was a great deal of momentum that was going, a lot of positive energy. Things were finally looking up for us.
I think that for that golden moment, The Native American community of the city came together, and I think that's probably the crowning achievement.
Went to Indian Heritage, that changed my whole life around, you know. All them people there. Courage, Marina, and Bob.
Everything came to a screeching halt.
I spent my summers in Wallowa, so that's why we were there. My whole family was there. Bob's daughter Robin was with us. We had been there the year prior and danced, and then decided to go back the summer of '96. And then we were going to continue on to South Dakota to Sundance and go to different powwows, and our dance team was going to meet us in the Hitchusita vans. They were going to come with other staff. When Chief Joseph was running, it was the Lakota Sioux people who were in Canada at the time who were trying to welcome them to safety. And so in honor of that, the Wallowa Band of the Nez Perce, who was hosting this particular powwow, asked Bob to carry the Canadian flag. And then we danced. The men's traditional was last. And he danced so beautifully. Here, we get to go one direction, and the Lakota go the other direction. And I remember watching him, and he stopped, and he started to dance the other direction. And I asked him, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Because I'm a Lakota." And I just remember smiling, and then he finished, and they were going to go again. And he stopped, and he looked over at me and just gave me that big Bob smile. And I smiled at him, and then he fell.
He was taken away too soon from us, but at the same time, that was the time that he was supposed to be taken.
It was very difficult for my son because he didn't get a chance to say goodbye to his dad. And, you know, it was difficult for Robin because he died in front of her.
Robin and I left in the ambulance. And then, oh, what a night. The next morning, I went back. All the drummers and powwow committee shook my hand, gave hugs, shook my father's hand. And one of my students was there, Alex Williams, Jr. And his grandfather was there. He was so kind. He asked me to ask if Alex could dance Bob out of the circle. But before doing that, they asked if I wanted them to stop everything. And I wasn't sure what to do. But I remember Bob talking about so many different things that Indian people had been asked not to do because of, I don't know, people's misunderstandings or fear. And it just became really clear to me that I knew Bob would not want to be a reason why people stopped dancing. So I asked them to keep dancing and dance harder. And I asked Alex to dance Bob out of the circle.
It really hurt, and everyone felt it.
Even with the pain, I feel so lucky, and I feel so blessed to have had him in my life.
For me, it was like losing my father over again.
We were at a powwow and we heard that, you know, and then we kind of couldn't believe it. So, you know, all the whole trip home, we were just kind of really thinking about it. It was all in our minds, but we didn't say nothing, you know. When we got home, then we started calling around, "Is that true? Is that true?" And I said, "Yeah, oh man, you know, I can't believe that."
Many staff members that I had to call at that time just couldn't, no, you're not telling me the truth.
It all seemed to go awry when Bob passed. There was a lot of confusion. No one knew what to do. No one knew how to process it.
And then you got a couple months, then you go back to school. And then that's when it kind of sets in a little bit more, you know, you're like, ah.
You know, I mean, the question was raised is, will we get through this? Will we get around it? Will we still have a school? He was certainly the heart of the school during his tenure, that's for sure. But, you know, he put together a good staff.
Bob was absolutely instrumental in the school, but I don't think he was the school. I don't even think he would tell you that. I don't know. It was a team, and he was the great leader of that team.
And I think that's why we survived, frankly.
We had gone through quite a process of trying to replace the irreplaceable. It was very difficult to find anyone that could replace Bob, and we weren't very successful.
Maybe the school district just thought, just because it was a principal, you know, and you know, they worked their life to get to be a principal, that everybody was just going to kind of fall in line, which isn't the case, and definitely not the case for that school.
There was a few of us holdouts, if you will. Mary Lee and Mark and I did our very best to infuse the curriculum with Indian concepts and make it a Native-focused school. But as you continue to learn more and more resources, there's only so much that a couple people can do.
Shortly after Bob's passing, John Stanford also passed away, who was pretty supportive of Indian Heritage School, and the superintendent after John Stanford was not.
A few years after Robert's death, it was clear that the population was shrinking in the school. As a rallying point or a central point or a point of focus for the Native American community, that began to fragment. And I think that's primarily due to the lack of resources and the lack of finding the right people to run that school and maintain the special curriculum created for that population.
I don't think they did it necessarily on purpose. I think it's just, you know, it's something that wasn't in their face, something that they didn't have to deal with. And they got so many other problems that, you know, when it comes up, it'll quiet out after a little bit. We'll say a couple things and calm it down, and then maybe it'll go away. Just slowly bleed it to death. I think that's kind of what the district did.
Where's the school at now? Is it even still here?
I think it's really important that we don't get wiped away, that those memories are not going to be ignored and wiped out.
The idea that this symbol of what is possible when educators see and realize the potential in students is committed to a storage closet. I think it's a very sad thing.
The district was, you know, taking measures and steps towards relocating the Indian Heritage Middle College program. When you merge programs, you lose identity. And there really is no distinguished Indian Heritage Middle College. It has now effectively assimilated in with the Northgate Mall.
Revitalizing the Indian Heritage Middle College. Again, Sarah was right on with that in terms of where it's at. It definitely has lost its focus. It's lost the support that it had at one time, and it's kind of lost direction. So we are going to look at the Indian Heritage Middle College in the context of all the other programs we have, the other middle colleges, the interagency programs, to see how we can revitalize that, how we can rebuild the Indian Heritage Middle College and make it happen. So gone through some neglect, but we are committed to looking at that.
With the new superintendent, Jose Banda, I think that we all felt a sense of hopefulness and optimism that we hadn't felt in a long time, you know, and so it felt like these things were coming together in a way that it made sense to move this forward. Our rally was really to address this with the district and to say we don't approve of integrating it with Northgate Mall, that let's relocate it, you know, to another site and build on it, you know, and transform it back into something that's viable.
Our kids are also performing very poorly in Seattle Public Schools. And now they want to take away Indian Heritage High School, the one place that our kids could go and be themselves.
I can't tell you how many times we've been to the Seattle School Board to save Indian heritage, how many times we've been to the school board to say, keep us at this location or keep us at that location. How many times have we been to the Seattle School Board to say, what happened to Eaglestaff High School they promised us?
I do remember the proposal about changing the name of Wilson Pacific to the Robert Eaglestaff School.
This was like Mr. Eaglestaff's tribe. He was getting younger natives ready for the world, so that's a good idea. They should stick with that. And if that was so many years ago, they're kind of late.
The details of renaming the school and the work that was required to rename it just never, you know, came to fruition. So UNEA, we want to make that happen. We need to do something to memorialize Indian heritage and Robert Eaglestaff and carry on the institutional memory and also the significance of his leadership.
Hello. In celebration of Native American History Month, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge Robert Eaglestaff, who was a great leader to us, alumni of American Indian Heritage and community members across Washington State. Renaming the school has been a long-standing promise made by the former superintendent John Stanford in 1996. Unfortunately, Mr. Stanford succumbed to cancer and the promise is sadly dashed. Right now, you have an opportunity to move the promise forward and honor a commitment made by John Stanford and thereby assigning the first public school in Washington State to be named after a contemporary Native leader, educator, and visionary.
Can I have 1 minute?
I'm terribly sorry. We have to move on to our student presentation.
Well, I'm a student. I would like to propose. I would like to hold a proposal not to close Indian Heritage High School. I'm Reese. I attend Ingram High School as a junior, and I'm Tlingit Haida. We have the highest population of Native students and would like to host Indian Heritage at Ingram High School for 2 consecutive years until we can hold our own facility and rename it under Robert Eaglestaff. Revitalization of our program is essential to our Native youth. By eliminating Indian Heritage program and removing support services, funding, and resources from our Native learners is institutional racism and
I think it's a long time coming, and I think the fact that people can still talk about this and support it 17 years later says a lot to changing the name and remembering a Native man that brought success to the Native community here in Seattle.
For me, it would mean a lot just to be able to preserve his legacy and everything that he had done and fought for.
I feel that Seattle Public Schools hasn't really served Native youth very well, and I think that would be a good step forward.
I'm committed to Indian education. I want to see a focused Native school. And like before, I don't mean just specifically for Native learners. Back in the day, students would interview in whether they were Native or not, but they knew they were at a Native-focused school. And that's what I wish would happen again. I'm a little concerned about changing the name and then the education not being a component of that.
I think that was the one thing that Bob insisted on. If you received a diploma from the school, it was pretty much assured that you could get into a community college or to a tech school or whatever. And in some cases, people have gone on to four-year colleges. That would be the thing that I would like to see happen if it's going to resurrect again.
People that knew him, you know, and people that know of him, you know, still respect him, whether he's got his name on the building or not. So, but yeah, if you had to, you know, if you were going to put a name on a building, you know, that'd be a great name to put on a building.
His name, when you say it, it's so powerful.
That name, Eaglestaff, it in our language it means, you know, like the speaker, you know, because back in the day when we'd see the cavalry, we'd come, you know, ride, and the person with that Eaglestaff, you know, they learned how to talk English, they learned how to talk whatever, you know, they were linguists, I guess, you know. So they go out there and talk and then make relations with, you know, the two parties. And so that name, Eaglestaff, holds a lot of prestige, you know, and so if they're going to call it Eaglestaff, you know, it has to be a good, you know, a good school.
He had a big role in developing where the school became, and yeah, he should definitely be having a big part of it still, like at least his name on it, because in my opinion, there's only two other natives worthy to be mentioned in the same breath with Mr. Eaglestaff. That's Crazy Horse and Geronimo. Mr. Eaglestaff is a man.
We've got a lot of schools named after white folks all over the country, politicians, successful men, successful women. We have some schools named now finally after African Americans, and some after Hispanic background individuals. Very few schools named after Native Americans. I guess that speaks to what has been perceived as a lack of power or influence in the Native American community over the past 100 years. I think that's changing, and I sure hope so. I think the school should be named for Robert Eaglestaff because he was an excellent educator, a very fine one who created a school, a very important school. Not just important to Seattle's population, but I think important to the nation as a whole, where the treatment of Native American peoples over this last 100 years and more has been, I guess, a quiet word for it would be execrable, horrid in many ways.
The Seattle Public Schools really needs to understand that, you know, it's within our treaty as Native peoples that we signed a paper that said, okay, you guys will give us education and a proper education. And Indians and schools have kind of a weird relationship due to boarding schools.
We've used Indian Heritage as really a central hub for community gathering.
People came all over to be together, whether it was basketball or powwows or whatever, school. But people find it at central.
You know, it's very significant and important that we continue to have a place to meet and gather. Without a place of power, it's really hard to organize community.
You know, back home, my relatives, they say, you know, our Indian ways are not out there in the city. But I found them out here, you know, with Indian Heritage School.
The curriculum of learning about, you know, the Native culture, I would have never got that in any other school, you know. I would have thought Native culture was, you know, some totem poles and casinos.
I don't know, I think about Eaglestaff and the Lakota class we took with him, and that really meant a lot. It made me want to learn more about my heritage, so I went back to Montana and I learned about my heritage. I went to the Sundance and I became members of certain societies and found my center.
All my cousins, you know, and all my friends, they were all, you know, gangbangers, you know, and did different things, went to prison. And that was kind of where I was on my way to go. And then when I went to Indian Heritage, all these cultural teachings started coming. That's what changed my life around. You know, it was those things. Learning how to powwow, the dance group, you know, kept me away from all these different parties, different things, you know.
I was not supposed to be successful in any way. And I was told this by previous educators and administrators and other people who didn't know what they were talking about, you know, and it kept me in a state of perpetual shame. No matter how hard I try, I'm just going to fail. And I might have held on to that falsehood if I hadn't, you know, met Robert Eaglestaff and he hadn't talked to me and he hadn't been able to reach me. But more importantly is that I'm not the only one, and that should be recognized. There were kids before me and there were kids after me who need the same sort of guidance and structure.
The greatness of going to the school, no matter what year you went there, is we're all united, we're all family, we all have the same hopes and same dreams for our children. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I would have loved to send her to Heritage.
I guarantee if you were still here today, none of this would be going on. This would still be a school running strong.
Like I said before, you would probably be, you know, superintendent of the district. And if that wasn't the case, you know, every June he'd be handing out diplomas and an Eagle Feather.
We award each student an Eagle Feather for the achievement of the high school diploma. The Eagle Feather is the highest award that in the Indian culture one can receive. Eagle Feather was given on deeds of valor, and this is definitely a deed of valor that these students have earned.
People that remember him, remember that the way he walked is the way we should all be walking. You know, honorably, passionately, truthfully.
His legacy and everything that he's done, it's never ended and it never will. He is proud of every single one of us for what we are doing, and especially those people that he got to be a part of in their life. And, you know, it's really hard not to have him to validate this for us. But I feel it all the time, and I know he's just so proud and just looking down with a big smile.
they